Cosmo-Techno-Poiesis, Architecture of Environmental Control. Architecture is a mono-technological boundary. While traditional architecture was capable of providing shelter from the environment, the advent of heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems at the beginning of the 20th century established the building envelope as a cocoon in which an alternative universe was maintained. The architectural boundary is a place of intense negotiation. The layer between inside and outside does not just mediate between indoor and outdoor climate, the focus of most construction regulations, but also negotiates a psychological positioning of the inhabitant in relationship to the environment. Michelle Eddington, former professor of sustainable architectural design at Yale University, problematizes the increasingly hermetically sealed architectural envelopes which divorce the human body from its natural environment in order to endorse the work of artist-architect Philip Beasley. His almost transhumanist sculptures, according to her, rethink the engagement of humans with architectural boundaries through technological augmentation and almost lifelike behaviors. She states, Beasley's environments always question the idea of boundary, and in doing so, question the very nature of architecture. Architecture divides what's inside and what's outside, what is nature and what is culture. The inside is a space of control, while the outside is uncontrolled and hostile. The environment is either filled with archetypes of fear or with energies and weather phenomena not fitting into our energy calculations. The latter leads to increasingly higher energy standards, such as those for nearly zero energy buildings, and with it prescribed wall insulation values and air tightness factors. Luis Berrios-Negron, artist-architect and postdoctoral researcher at Umeå School of Architecture in Sweden, uses the greenhouse as an actual architectural typology and as a metaphor for an artistic device to question nature's outsider position and to describe how architecture can manifest a human mindset towards nature. Control and domination is expressed by placing nature, ironically, on the inside, where man thinks he can dominate life, to extract and accelerate or to decelerate and conserve growth, regardless of place or season. That sightless, modern illusory power sandwiched between the industrial logic of translucent surfaces is what which cuts, represses, forgets and forgets the realities of habitable environment, he states. Architecture in that sense is not just a technological solution which mitigates energy losses, but it also a manifestation of ideology which separates the human body from the natural environment or even reality. The architectural envelope is where an increasingly questionable separation of nature and culture, as Donna Haraway criticizes, is formalized and manifested in physical actuality and in a metaphorical collective mindset. This paper looks at architectural ways out of nature-culture dichotomies, while realizing at the same time that Haraway's ideas of nature cultures an endless conglomerate of entanglements of matter, stories, life, and so forth, has practical, common-sense limits when it comes to buildings. Who in the Western world wants to remove the architectural separator between the human and its environment? The text looks at possible ways to loosen this boundary by reintroducing nature as an architectural companion species. According to artist-architect Frederick Kiesler, architecture is a form of technological environment, which helps humans in their survival in the natural environment. Technology, according to him, is a form of social heredity which has in it the long history of tool-making. He states, thus, a contemporary chair, for instance, is the product of many generations of other tools for man to rest his body in fatigue. This is heredity in technology. What that means is that our built environment, or technological environment, is an archive of previous human nature struggles and former knowledge production. Architecture is a technology which is placed between the human body and its environment. The formulation of this technological machine visualizes a society's relationship to the actual and the imagined natural environment, while actual local weather characteristics, material availability, and cultural idiosyncrasies contribute to a vernacular architecture and its specific boundary conditions. The worldview of that society or cosmology negotiates how much those boundaries are open to inside-outside mediation. Philosopher Yukoi coined the term cosmo-techniques in order to work on the problem that he sees in the world. One of them, an unquestioned monotechnological development, which is rooted in a certain global worldview or cosmology. This one-dimensional development, according to him, contributes to the destruction of the planet and to the maintenance of fixed human cosmos, human-non-human, and nature-culture relations, and he states, I gave a preliminary definition of cosmo-techniques as a unification between the cosmic order and the moral order through technical activities in order to suggest that technology should be resituated in a broader reality, which enables it and also constrains it. The detachment of technology from such reality has resulted from the desire to be universalizing and to become the ground of everything. Such a desire is made possible by the history of colonization, modernization, and globalization, which, being accompanied by its history of economic growth and military expansion, has given rise to a monotechnological culture in which modern technology becomes the principal productive force and largely determines the relationship between human and non-human beings, human and cosmos, and nature and culture. The problems brought about by this monotechnological culture are leading to the exhaustion of resources and of life on Earth, and to the destruction of the environment, which are central to the discourse around the Anthropocene. Western architecture, as a form of technology to negotiate between humans and nature, follows the logic of what Hui describes, monotechnological prescriptions which are embedded in an unquestioned but slowly crumbling technoscientific cosmology, are dictated by law and leave no room for alternative cosmologies, technodiversity, or alternative engagements of humans with their environment. Or, as historian Helmut Trischler and Fabienne Will stated when talking about the technocene and technosphere, humans submit to the artifacts they have created themselves, shifting the responsibility for human-environment relationships to things. The increasingly hermetically sealed borders of Western buildings do not solve the root problem of a troubled human-environment relationship. In fact, their purpose of creating borders between the human and its environment does exactly that, deepening the border between the human and its environment. Poiesis, willing architecture into the world. Architecture, or in fact every form of natural or man-made matter, is a manifestation of invisible forces, entanglements and hidden networks of different human and non-human power struggles. Kiesler calls these interacting forces co-reality. He states, what we call forms, whether they are natural or artificial, are only the visible trading post of integrating and disintegrating forces mutating at low rates of speed. Reality consists of these two categories of forces which interact constantly in visible and invisible configurations. This exchange of interacting forces I call co-reality, and the science of its relationship co-realism. The term co-realism expresses the dynamics of continual interaction between man and his natural and technological environments. Specifically, the term interaction sounds very familiar and foreshadows feminist theorist Karen Barat's intra-actions by a few decades. They state, the neologism intra-action signifies the mutual constitution of entangled agencies. That is, in contrast to the usual interaction, which assumes that there are separate individual agencies that precede the interaction, the notion of intra-action recognizes that distinct agencies do not precede, but rather emerge through their interaction. It is important to note that the distinct agencies are only distinct in a relational, not an absolute sense, that is, agency are only distinct in relation to their mutual entanglement. They don't exist as individual elements. Architecture comes into being when the time is ripe. All interacting or interacting forces come together. Something or someone wants it to exist, and this something or someone has the means to make it exist. Architecture in that sense is a form of individual or collective artistic poiesis, the will to bring into being. Poiesis is where artwork, artist, receiver, idea and meta come together. The concept overlaps with the foundational concept of magic, where willing leads to manifestations in the world of control over the ego. Will, in the magical sense, is neither good nor bad, but depends on the intention of the magician. The size, construction time, material quality, and the technological standard of architecture is directly related to the intensity with which one or many will. An Egyptian pyramid or a New York City high-rise is brought into the world with a considerable bigger amount of willing than a hut made from leaves or a tent bought in the supermarket, while its existence as a typology comes with a long history of willing people as well. The willing of buildings, and accordingly the manifestation of them, is in itself not a bad thing. To will protection from the environment's attacks, for example, comes with a different amount of control fantasies than the willing of the biggest building in the world. Intention is key. We can consider the built environment, the existing stock of matter which divides human bodies from their natural environment, to be the product of human poiesis or their willing to keep nature at a distance. Another interesting idea is if architecture, as a global technology, is in fact creating or perpetuating itself. Peter Huff, Professor Emeritus of Geology, argues that the Anthropocene is essentially built on the technosphere, the technological conglomerate of human activity which is out of control for the individual and therefore collective human. He states, "We abandon the apparently natural assumption that the technosphere is primarily a human-created and controlled system and instead develop the idea that the workings of modern humanity are a product of a system that operates beyond our control and that imposes its own requirements on human behavior. The technosphere is a system for which humans are essential, but nonetheless subordinate parts. As shorthand, we can say that the technosphere is autonomous. This does not mean that humans cannot influence its behavior, but that the technosphere will tend to resist attempts to compromise its function. In a sense, architecture, as a part of the technosphere which perpetuates the Anthropocene, can be seen as a non-human entity which wants to be fed with more technology, more matter, more human will, or it fights back. A golem, Frankenstein's monster. How much are we in control of our architectural technologic, and how much control should it have over the environment and us? Memento mori, giving up control. How much control is too much control? The following part will concentrate on the concept of death and life as a metaphorical transient categories of architecture. Newly built architecture can be considered as being born out of human will or poiesis and in total control of the inner and therefore psychologically the outer environment, while neglected buildings can be considered to be in the process of dying and therefore the human is less in control of inner or outer environments. What productive states of architecture exist between birth and death, between control and giving up control, which allow for non-human agencies and provide human habitats at the same time? While the transhumanists want to overcome human mortality and the limits of the planet, philosopher Patricia McCormack argues, from an ahuman perspective, for a way out of the world's problems through the embracing of death, and she states, "Where I want to push things is through the incorporation of the deaths of the species in actuality and to seize the actual deaths of the non-human other as inherently joyful affirmative qualities of protest. And this I see exemplified in two activist philosophies which result in two material actions, human extinction and animal abolition. Ahumanism and transhumanism can be seen as being on an oppositional spectrum with different degrees of human control desires over the non-human other. Critical, cultural, philosophical posthumanism fits better to the former in terms of giving up human control or acknowledging more agency of non-humans, while cybernetic posthumanism or transhumanism overlaps with the later. While McCormack advocates the slow phase-out of human control over the world, the transhumanists want to achieve a godlike status which allows them to be in total control of life itself. One can argue that both the voluntary species suicide and the conquest of death is hubristic and therefore human-centric. The following part explores steps on the gradient between both extreme positions in order to generate productive ways to look at architectural production and advocates for a Buddhist-like middle way of architectural environmental control. The Anthropocene exists, at least partially, because of an unbalanced human understanding of how much nature control is the right amount. Technology is a gift which allows us to take what we need, but we thought we needed it all. The following part investigates some concepts which are seen as fruitful for an architectural discourse which allows non-human agency and tries to avoid total environmental control. Which states of architecture exists on the spectrum of species suicide to eternal life? Our Western architectural thinking is increasingly moving towards the latter. While houses used to be built out of natural available materials which would decay at some point or another, today we try to build for eternity. While the killing of our building stocks would be similar to McCormick's extreme, the other extreme can be found in contemporary construction regulations. The denial of death, and the desire of eternal life and absolute environmental control. Here we look at the idea of architecture of decay as a form of memento mori, you will remember you must die. Decay is shown as one-directional entropy of architecture but hopes to reopen the thinking for an architecture of imperfection, transient form, openness, open-endedness, and flexibility, openness to agency of others ready to give up human control. The transient nature of decay, decomposition, the Japanese concept of wabi-sabi, or its digital counterpart, the glitch, can be seen as different forms of non-human agency. When talking about Tea Master Senno Rikyu and his understanding of wabi-sabi, architecture professor Rumiko Handa states the following. There are a number of instances that demonstrate Rikyu's preference for impermanence, which is important because it shows the limitation of human control in comparison to natural forces. Rikyu's desire to submit to forces beyond human control extends to allowing the artifact not to function in its primary utility. Art theorist Rosa Menkman, when speaking about glitches as machine-revealing entities, acknowledges non-human agencies in a similar fashion. A glitch is the most puzzling, difficult to define, and enchanting noise artifact. It reveals itself to the perception as an accident, chaos, or luxuration, and gives a glimpse into normally obfuscated machine language. Rather than creating the illusion of a transparent, well-working interface to inform, the glitch captures the machine revealing itself. While the medium of wabi-sabi and the glitch is different, they share a similarity of acknowledging and appreciating non-human agency, giving up human control. One could say that the former is engaging with natural non-human agencies, while the latter is focusing on man-made technological non-human agencies. Both reveal a hidden, true reality, which is outside of the control of humans. Both the glitch and the concepts related to wabi-sabi work only in an equilibrium of the right amount of human control and non-human agencies at the same time. Leaning too much on either side of the control spectrum from human to non-human agency can make the system collapse. Similar to a ruin, which is only acknowledged as such if some parts are still standing and some damage exists, the non-human in the glitch and in the idea of wabi-sabi can be seen as a form of transient or vibrant matter, to use Jane Bennett's terms, or as a form of interaction of time, space, and matter. And maybe it is here where the true problem of the Anthropocene is located, time, or better, the non-acceptance of time in its transient nature. Our scientific, technological, rational Western cosmology suggests to be always on top of the invisible matterings, interactions, and vibrant matters. Glitches reveal the malfunctioning of the man-made system, which forces one to acknowledge one's own death. The Western people want to control time, or better, their own death, and the decay of the body due to a lacking enchanted cosmology. In the same way that architecture is a representation of our collective cosmological worldview, current architectural practices as technologies to control nature symbolize or manifest our collective worldviews and desires. The current desire is to maintain or increase control over the world and to conquer death as the last natural entity, which is clearly visible in the aforementioned transhuman interpretation of posthumanism and in the current desire of becoming a multiplanetary species.